cheeseburger, 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 Big Mac, Big Mac, Big Mac, Big Mac, Whopper, 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 hamburger, cheeseburger, Big Mac, Whopper, hamburger, cheeseburger, Big Mac, Whopper, hamburger, cheeseburger, Big Mac, Whopper, 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 Big Mac, Whopper.
This popular Dune Euro, yep, Dune Euro, is getting an expansion injected in its veins. Rise of Ix. Real quick, Dune Imperium is a worker placement meets deck builder all set in the Dune universe, as you play one card from your hand that dictates where your worker can go on a turn, as well as give you benefits on that card. This game has troops fighting over conflicts on the planet itself for points, all while allegiance with the factions on the left-hand side of the board have players competing for points. For more on how to play, check out our full review in the top right-hand corner. Now for this expansion, it adds some more playable powers and then some more cards to deck build with, as well as introducing new mechanics through these two new boards here. There's also this epic mode in the game to play with. So let's go to the review right now. To start the pros, the game's components in this expansion box are right on par for the course of the Dune Imperium experience. Everything feels great with the new wooden components, the new boards, even tiles, and then also the player powers and all the new cards. Yep, everything visually is going to have the same exact look as the original Dune Imperium. And big shout out for providing player aids for 1 and 2 player modes. That will be very much appreciated for many players out there. And bonus points for providing more plastic bags to fit stuff, and with all the new stuff, it can all still fit in the base game box if you want. But enough on these components, let's get to the gameplay pros, namely all the new possibilities in the game. Let's start with the tech in this new sideboard. Tech are these buyable abilities that can give you engine building stuff sometimes, like how about getting 2 money at the start of every round? Or you can every round discard a card and draw a card. Or there's even stuff like giving you rewards for winning a conflict now. There's also this one that gives you points for being low on faction tracks at the end of the game. So that encourages some new type of thinking that we didn't see before. Also, these techs are doing that thing where if you buy them, you get something right away. So that could be a nice injection into your round's momentum to get troops or an entry card, all while getting an ability you can use right away. Yeah, let's just permanently change deck building by letting me always put new cards on top of my deck. Since these all cost spice, that can add a lot more early game motivation to grabbing spice if you want some starting techs, depending on what these are. There's 18 of these techs, so you can't be too certain in what order they'll come up. This makes Rise of Ix feel different right off the bat, as you have to initially account for 3 randomly flipped tiles. Now the next thing on this new board is this guy, the dreadnought. Ooh, these are a new type of unit added to the game that makes people fight a bit differently. Once you buy one, a dreadnought is a unit that you have permanently. That is, they never die in combat, cause I guess they're floating above the planet's surface, and even when they fight each other, they retreat unscathed. Okay, whatever. These are worth 3 strength instead of the normal 2, and you can buy 2 of them. But you don't always get to use these to keep bashing your opponent's armies in, because they get temporarily removed if you win a conflict. This is a really fitting way to prevent snowballing, where the winner of a conflict has to take a fighting dreadnought and put it on one of these regions as an area control marker. Now you get to choose somewhere to control temporarily for 1 round. And then after 1 round, that dreadnought comes back to your garrison. It's temporarily a loss in fighting force, but doesn't feel bad at all because you're getting another temporary benefit. Until that time's out, and then you get your trusty dreadnought back into action. But enough about these sideboard ideas. Let's talk about this bigger new board that now covers up stuff. But before we put it on, what is getting covered up? Now, these were 4 spaces in the base game that were very understandable omissions from the game. To put it simply, they weren't that interesting. They mostly led to pretty isolated play, where going there only triggered one thing, where usually going on spaces in Dune Imperium triggers 2 things, like going up a faction track and doing the space, or sending troops out and getting the space. Like, Hall of Oratory was a very vanilla feeling space to go on that was usually pretty mediocre come mid to late game. Right, so now we just put this new board on, and yeah, there we go, covers up nicely. You first got this track called a shipping track. This is a way more nuanced way of collecting resources than before. Every time you trigger the symbol, you can move up a space with your freighter. or pull out your freighter to reset to the bottom. If you decide to pull out, you get what's on that row, as well as everything below it. You're basically depositing effort in and eventually withdrawing. If you pull out too early, you're just getting mere money, where you could have invested more to get money and troops and move up a faction track. One cool thematic thing too, just like Siege Tabur on the planet, the second freighter space, interstellar shipping, is 2 faction influence members only. So that gives a neat incentive to get influence with the shipping guild, where influence with them tended to be undervalued in the base game, since one of them was really expensive and the other one, fold space, wasn't something you could necessarily spam. Okay, but now let's get to what I was most excited about, these 35 new cards to deck build with. All entirely new, with very few duplicates. You just go ahead and take them and shuffle them into this base game deck right here. These are super exciting because they take the already nuanced card play of Dune Imperium and give more. There's more characters like Yamis or Savia with their own specialties. And then you got cool interactions like local fence to splash into older deck builds. There's even revamped base cards in a pretty healthy way. You got Treachery being a stronger version of Power Play that costs more. Even Shai-Hulud makes an official entrance into the game. And then there's this new mechanic, discarding, when you can discard a card from your hand as a cost to activate an ability. Leads to more hand management, right? Well, also leads into more types of deck builds too, with this other brand spanking new mechanic where you get the benefit if it happens to be discarded or trashed at any time. Wow, so how about discarding as part of a card's cost, then trigger that original card, then see, oh, I discarded this card too. I get that ability too. And the fact that you can trash cards from your discard into an Imperium makes these cards extremely satisfying to trash and grab resources from a source that's not in your hand or the game board. Last new card mechanic, Infiltration, to go on spaces where opponents' agents are. This adds a clean nuance to these cards, where you can plan around one space, like Highliner being always available to you if you buy this card, especially more useful at 4 players. So let's go down some other card abilities that jumped out. There's a Desert Ambush to force enemies to retreat for each unit you put down. Or there's a Weirding Way, where you can take another turn right away. There's other notable cards that work with the new mechanics. Landing rights will move up your freighters. Then there's this massive full-scale assault to get you a dreadnought as soon as you buy it. Or this engineer that can trash itself to get you a point if you have a bunch of techs. Speaking of techs, these new cards go hand in hand with these quite well for more combos. You can have an engine to use the Holo Projector's tech to discard and draw every round. Well, how about discarding a card from your hand to trigger the discard reward? Now we have an extra water. And then now you can take your normal turn to trash the water peddler. Yep, trashing is better now, and then you can get another water. Can you see how this can get really fun with bottom abilities like Treachery to deploy troops out of nowhere potentially twice in one turn? We can't forget about the old cards too, where this Reverend Mother now has a lot more nuance, where discarding could actually potentially help your opponents. Gotta be a little more careful about using this Bene Gesserit Witch. Oh, and then the Shipping Guild destination cards are just cooler, because remember how 2 influence with the guild unlocks something now? Like, Smuggler Copter is now more viable than before. Also, since the board has new interesting spaces, seemingly whatever green destination cards from base, like the Dagger, have new life because they let you grab a tech, or a dreadnought. And then even the yellow has some updated spots if you want to focus on the freighter. The more stuff doesn't end there though, because there's more of these tiny cards for more replayability. Namely, let's talk about these conflict cards, these 4 new ones, where there's a cool tier 3 one now that can give first place up to 3 points and second place 1 point for winning. The second place getting points is an idea that again wasn't in base game. There's 17 new entry cards with more stuff that interacts with new mechanics like Expedite and Machine Culture. More on these later. Then we got 6 new player powers to bring our total to 12 now. And these are all gonna have the same little quirks just like they do in base game. One guy we liked was this purple suit man, or Kaz, who is based around deck building, where his signet ring lets him literally buy a cheap card. Then his passive can let him trash a card at the end of the round if he has workers in the right places. Or there's this other guy who has heavy lasgun cannons to make dreadnoughts have 4 strength. Or he can buy tech off of his signet ring. Oh, or how about this guy's signet ring to give him a freighter movement? There's even this tier 4 difficulty one. That's right, tier 4 is a new difficulty, and this prioritizes the faction tracks. Okay, we can't cover all of these, but there's a lot of comfort to be taken in that they mix fairly well with the base game abilities. The new powers aren't noticeably power crept or add any wacky interactions. So thank goodness you can still play as Paul Atreides, and keep looking at the top card of your deck if you want to plan around a new discarding heavy type of deck. Okay, let's wrap up the pros by saying all this more is overall just very accessible. There's only a couple of pages to really read here in this rulebook. All the changes are really easy to verbally explain, and it all runs true to about the same time. Once you get the hang of everything, you can see that games actually end a round earlier because everyone is slightly stronger now. But hey, are all these cool new things really that great on a close glance? Let's get to the cons. Cons time, where this expansion doesn't help the base game experience, or sometimes downright even hurts it. The first one is that now, even with all the new complexity, pursuing a strategy, specifically one of the new strategies, can start locking you down this decision path in a game that otherwise promoted more adaptation. Dune Imperium based felt more open-ended as you adapted to opponents and also the emerging randomness from all the card flips in the game. Like, think about going harder on military. You bought the dreadnoughts that never die. And so obviously to abuse this and make your investment worth it, you're going to constantly fight all the time. Then you probably pick up whatever tech tiles that happen to help fighting to keep your snowball going. If you're deciding to go for a shipping track strategy, you're pretty much always going to open with shipping guild influence and then consistently put workers on these two spaces. Or how about just going hard on tech tiles? There's a big incentive to go super hard on spice, and then pick up a lot of tech tiles to score points through this Ixian engineer. And then even the encouragement of more deck building can get you very focused on getting a certain deck, like always wanting to buy cards that give you a discard if you buy other cards with discard benefits. In general, because Dune Imperium is still at its core a deck builder with slow buying and slow trashing, it's never the case where you can just pivot your deck to start going down another strategy. This was fine in base game, where players generally weren't going that hard in a specific direction. In Rise of X, you could potentially go down a path that repeatedly gives you good benefits round upon round. That is, those returns don't really diminish, or some of those returns can be points, so you're gonna keep doing that. This railroading with the new strategies actually gets us to the next point, where player interaction is now dampened. Since going for some of the strategies can give you points outside of the central conflict, tech tiles I'm looking at you specifically, well, you don't need to fight as often. How about we go to the guy that wants to fight a lot? He has 2 dreadnoughts, and then maybe he has a combat ability like a +4 on every single combat. For the non-military specialist, it's best to just let this warmonger get what he wants and just try to find your points elsewhere. You know how rally troops was a great way to stack up units for upcoming fights in base game? Well, there's no more of that. In fact, there's zero way to get more than 2 troops from the board anymore besides Highliner. Factor in how more people are just getting Spacing Guild destinations for the shipping track, and you see a lot more conflicts where someone just Highliners and then no one bothers to contest because they don't have the resources to do so. Now, perhaps Highliner should have been +4 troops instead of 5 in the base game, and now that nerf really feels pressing. The game's new systems have some sources that give you troops. You can go on the shipping track to get troops, or you can potentially get it from tech. But these will never give you as much as Highliner in one action. And also, you have to set these up. You have to set up the shipping track, or you need to spend a good amount of spice on these spaces that are randomly flipped over. So you might not even be able to buy troops here. Not only is the conflict interaction hurt, but there's less interaction when it comes to worker placement overall. But how, right? There's the same amount of spaces. Well, when you're taking out weak spaces to make them more fresh, that gives everyone better spaces to put workers, so the board's not as tight. Also, these spaces encourage their own strategies where people want to go again and again, and we already talked about this with the new strategies. Also, the shipping track and tech tiles each have 2 spaces where you can trigger their effect. So it's really hard to just block someone off from doing one of these if they're about to make a good move there. It's especially low conflict for tech tiles because there's just no way to interact with anyone else's tech tiles in the game. or to even clear the tech buys in case your opponent is about to buy one that is really good, and you don't have the means to buy it away from them. We would have liked a system like in Lord's Waterdeep, where you can clear all the quests and then grab one at a weaker benefit. Same thing here, you could clear all the techs, then grab one at a higher spice cost, like +1 or +2. And if you can't afford the new buys, well, you can use this mechanic we didn't talk about yet to put a supply troop to negotiate to make this cheaper spice to buy in the future. Rise of Ix. Now, it's fine to have everyone excelling in their own way, and yeah, you could even get points for doing so, but you're taking away from the central conflict of Dune Imperium, which is fighting on the desert surface. So these previous two mentioned points are going to be just totally fine for some Dune Imperium players. But this next one, every single Dune Imperium player needs to be careful of. That is that Rise of Ix makes Dune Imperium suffer way more from unhealthy RNG. So many things to cover here. Let's start with the deck building. Since you're just adding 35 cards to 67, you now have over 100 cards in the possibility of what can flip over. This means more variety, but not very well controlled variety. You can have more Imperium rows with weird loadouts, like way too many high cost cards early to make the deck building stagnate, specifically at lower player counts where there's less people to buy cards. Also, with over 100 cards that could be flipped, it's just way harder to account for what type of card will get flipped over next, with new mechanic cards thrown in the mix. So going hard on a certain idea, like even Fremdbond from base, is more unpredictable. In our review of Dune Imperium, we brought up a suggestion to fix the Imperium row stagnation by potentially making it a round by round basis to change cards out. Now something a little similar is here, only in the solo mode. Okay, so the designer is making the stance that he does not want Imperium row churning, which is a little weird with the expansion ideas of encouraging more deck building with all the cards that combo off each other and let you discard and do benefits. Why not have the expansion take out some of the cards from the base game for a more controlled experience? Or even give you 6 cards in your Imperium row instead of 5 for just more options. The deck building is currently in an odd place. The more serious players who just want to play with the new mechanics in a similar environment suffer from the bloated deck with more RNG, and on the other hand, the people who just want to push buttons with all the new cards won't see them that often in a 100+ card deck. But let's talk about this new intrigue card deck. Again, in our review of Dune Imperium, we've had the concern of intrigue cards being strong but still able to be accounted for. Now, that is hard to account for. Same idea with the deck building. You're smacking on 15 intrigue cards to make it now a 15 card intrigue deck. This is worse than the pure dilution in the deck building because now you're making it more unpredictable on how intrigues, these swingy cards that give you an immediate benefit of your choosing, are drawn. Specifically, there are 7 added cards that can give you sneaky combat bonuses, which on to base game's 9, now there's 16 of these. Then there's 3 of them that give you points, which adds on to the base game's 5 to now have 8 cards that give you points. Even though the possibility of these cards isn't getting insanely skewed because of how more of every card is added, the fact that you're adding more cards to a swingy deck makes it possible to have more cards with all combats, or hands where you never draw combat intrigues. Or remember how there's now 8 ways to get points in this deck, where before there was only 5, making it harder to play around opponents' actual points. More on the point intrigues. You know how we covered that this card, Plans Within Plans, was a little too strong in base game? That wasn't fixed. And now you can draw it in addition to this new card, Grand Conspiracy. Another card that doesn't have you pay anything, you can just get points if you have the prereqs, and that can give you up to 2 points. So now you can have up to 4 points by not spending anything. Granted, okay, fine, the expansion cards never give you points outright, instead they're end game points, but still it feels gross for someone late game to just top deck these. Rise of Ix goes harder on the controversial idea that these cards can give you secret points without engaging in the central conflict, and at the very least should have replaced intrigue cards from the base game with the new ones. We're still under this umbrella of unhealthy randomness though, because now let's get to these tech tiles. First, these are not made equal at all with all sorts of spice costs and varying payouts. Oh, look, this one give you points. Whenever someone buys a tile, the one underneath is immediately flipped. Oh yeah, if you dislike the randomness from Imperium row buys, you're gonna hate this. See, since you can buy a tile as an action in the middle of the round, you can keep taking actions after. And you bought it with spice. So yeah, of course I'm gonna spend 8 spice to get a point, and then having that ability for the rest of the game is just the cherry on top. Or I can spend 6 spice to get a sudden track move for up to 2 factions. Hey, isn't that a reward for winning a conflict you can just pay for now? Or how about a way to suddenly draw an intrigue card and reset your entire intrigue hand? Yeah, that's here to lead to all sorts of intrigue card hand outcomes now. Or this one, you can pay 2 spice to go up a faction track. Already good. Then you can get a point if you have 3 or more influence on all 4 influence tracks. Heck, this is literally a free point for many players late game, and you're at the very least going to buy this to prevent your opponents from getting it. Tech tiles, while adding in some interesting engine interactions and also increasing demand for spice, are just adding more randomness to a game with already more randomness here. The randomness is just so baked into this design of text that they'd have to be completely redesigned to be somewhat balanced. So I guess to start that, you could say that whenever someone buys a tech, there's a round delay, and then you flip this at the start of a new round. All right, let's move on from the randomness onto another thing that surprised us, the dreadnoughts. They're actually not that interesting of an addition, despite how cool they sound. Oh, and then they also look really similar to the agent pieces here. Since dreadnoughts never die, people always put them in fights. Because, well, why wouldn't you just try to get second or third place for free? This feels really brain dead. They're in a funky space where, of course, they don't want to be too much stronger than normal units to force everyone into an arms race to get them, but just by being slightly stronger, they don't feel that impactful in a single fight. So their ability is that when you win, you get to area control, which sounds cool at a glance, but this was not something that needed to be expanded on in the base game, since controlling one single area for a single kickback wasn't a big deal. And the defensive bonus of a +1 wasn't a big deal either. To make this all weirder, to get a dreadnought, it's tied to the space where you're supposed to buy a tech too by paying spice. So it feels suboptimal to go on the space without both having 3 Solari and a bunch of spice for a tech. We would have much rather had the space be cheaper and only give you a dreadnought, and then if you want to throw something in, it could be persuasion or something. Right, so then what would make the dreadnoughts more special? Well, they already have the right idea with this concept that's not really well marketed. That is, your dreadnoughts are immune to a lot of your opponent's gotcha abilities like that because dreadnoughts are not considered troops. This is already a pretty cool benefit, so maybe the game could expand upon that protection and then maybe not make these feel so brain dead by making them completely invincible. Also, you can make their upfront abilities less complex. Now a little bit onto balance. Admittedly, Dune Imperium with its 1 copy of some cards for deck building, yep, I'm looking at you, Sardaukar Legion, as well as its intrigue cards being kind of everywhere, didn't have the best balance anyways. But let's talk about some things here that really caught our eye. Like maybe this new card, Trom Delegate, having 3 money as a reveal for only costing 1 persuasion might be a little strong. But okay. The one that actually caught our eye was this guy, Web of Power. Not only is its top payout really good, like you're getting great resources for at least 2, maybe even all 3 categories come mid to late game, but the bottom one, that's busted. You literally just get to move up a faction track for free, as well as giving you 1 persuasion on top of that. Imagine getting this card on round 1, and then just revealing it for the rest of the game to just go up any single faction track you want. Not sure why this wasn't restricted to moving up certain faction tracks, or at least making the persuasion cost to buy it higher. We have to address the new factions, of course, of which you get 6 more, like Black Widow from the MCU here. It's really not that bad here, it's just that one came to our attention. This guy that lets you see the top 2 intrigue cards of the deck and then pick 1. This is fine in power. That is, if you don't draw or see intrigue cards that give points or give an early tempo boost, intrigue cards are kind of all over the place, right? But anyways, once you do this, you have no passive at all, so that's pretty stale. This would have to be completely redesigned to be actually balanced, since if you're drawing intrigues consistently Rise of Ix, that could lead to all sorts of outcomes, right? Oh, that guy who could buy the intrigues in base game? You can play him in this game. No, that's not healthy with this wackier, bigger intrigue deck. And you know how he could just jump up on the faction tracks for his other ability? Well, then you always buy this tech that rewards you for having distance on the faction tracks. This guy would have to be completely slowed down on at least his ability to buy intrigue cards. This guy is the key figurehead on how Rise of X has unhealthy additions to point scoring, and very closely connected to that, the intrigue deck. The final big con has to do with the additional game mode, the epic mode that is clearly marketed on the back of the box and on the website. In this, to win the game, you need 12 points instead of 10. And to make this not too long, the pacing of the game is just made faster. There's no longer any tier 1 conflicts, so it throws you right into tier 2s right away. And then everyone is made stronger through this starting card called Control the Spice. Control the Spice. This by itself is actually a great card. It adds a lot of nuance to early game where you can trash early or get spice in a different way. The problem comes with players actually being stronger without scaling much else of the game. Specifically, everyone starts with an intrigue card. Oh boy, we know how random an extra intrigue card can be, right? That's also not to mention that these intrigue cards that ask for prerequisites by the end of the game are just going to be easier to do because everyone is just stronger. Or how about this tech tile that is easier to do now? Plus, it is a little funky how these faction tracks are not scaled up. Why funky? Well, since the game's pace is accelerated, you're way more likely to get to the endgame point where people start capping on the faction tracks and can never get past. When that capping happens with more game time length left in this mode, you start losing that ongoing tension from the faction tracks with more time in the game. In fact, epic mode can have late game states where people aren't sure where else to get points. Say maybe they don't have a good military engine to challenge for first place on conflicts, so then they just resort to digging through the intrigue deck for RNG points. While the epic mode isn't all that bad, with technically no game-breaking problems, it's really stressing the tight nature of Dune Imperium, with its set prerequisites to get points everywhere. But man, again, is this Control the Spice card cool? We wish that it could have found its way into a non-epic game mode somehow. Okay, last con. There's some confusion on tech tile timing. The rulebook says that you can use it on an agent turn. Okay, well what is an agent turn? Upon some further digging, the designer meant this to be played at a plot intrigue card speed, meaning you can play it on a reveal turn too. Okay, now it's time for the nitpicks. Since the cons were things that didn't help or hurt the experience, the nitpicks are going to be really minor things that won't apply to the vast majority of Dune Imperium Rise of X players. How about the 1 to 2 player game with the rivals? You got new cards to account for the new spaces, but that's really it with the changes to these robot AI. That is, rivals don't really get modified to account for the new strategies to build towards. It's like they just added on the possibility of going on the new spaces without really factoring in those spaces' nuances. Simply put, they always put in dreadnoughts, they only buy certain types of techs, and they always go to stage 2 of the shipping track. That's really it, so it can feel poopy to see rivals end a game without using their saved up negotiation or saved up freighter. Plus, you have to manage the 2 rivals' tech abilities in 1 player, which is more bookkeeping. If you're looking for the 1 to 2 player experience to get revamped, with maybe more rival interactions or more rival conflict, this isn't really it. But hey, there's no denying that you, as the human, still get to play with all the new fresh stuff, despite the rivals feeling maybe a little wacky sometimes. Second nitpick, this symbol that distinguishes all the expansion cards from the base game is really light. Not sure why they didn't make it more visible. But hey, this is only annoying if you're the type of person to keep bouncing around and playing with the expansion and then not playing with it. Very last nitpick, rulebook is still square, which is annoying. And why no table of contents? And maybe more clarifications instead of putting most of the FAQ online? Now it's time for the recommender score. That is, in the context of this being an expansion to this game, Dune Imperium, how well is it improving this base game experience? So, by evaluating our pros and cons, this is gonna get a 5 out of 10. It is average, take it or leave it. Although it's almost a 4 out of 10 because $40 is pretty steep for the stuff you're getting here. And I could have sworn it was $50 MSRP when I first bought it. But yeah, I'm not really sure what happened there. Maybe I'm just remembering things wrong. Anyways, Rise of X is an expansion that doesn't follow a specific strong idea. It just adds more of everything in a tight euro, which is something you have to be very careful of. Some of this new stuff makes the game more interesting, while usually at the same time dragging down another aspect of the core experience. It replaces some spaces with new spaces. Cool idea, but These dreadnoughts aren't that nuanced actually, and these tech tiles have their own problems. More intrigue and deck building cards? Cool ideas, but are just smacked on and especially mess with expectations of intrigue hands. And then you got these 6 new powers. They're pretty cool, fun to play with. But did you really play Dune Imperium for strong, nuanced asymmetrical powers? Dune Imperium's identity was with the deck building and worker placement. And the deck building is less controlled, although it has some new ideas. And the worker placement is looser, with these being stronger than the old spaces. Base game of Dune Imperium didn't have any glaring issues, and okay, so for a deck builder, it makes total sense why you would add in more cards. But then it went overboard in adding in new abilities in a tight Euro. Tech tiles aren't deck building, there's more point sources that aren't conflict. These all sound great in a vacuum, but don't play on Dune Imperium's strengths much. Like, where are the heightened stakes for fighting, or more nuances to the faction influence track? Example comparison time. Let's look at the TI4 expansion, Prophecy of Kings, that just adds a whole bunch of stuff while also being a bit similar to its base game price. It can really just get away with that by just adding more of everything because it really expands upon the central idea of TI4, negotiation. By adding in more points of interest to fight over, more expendable abilities to hold at your opponent's throats, and replacing public objectives with more thoughtful ones, the game has a lot more nuance to all of the negotiation. Plus, it actually gives more maps to play around with, and overhauls old asymmetrical powers. Right, but this is still an average recommendation from us. So if you're the type of person that doesn't really mind the increased randomness, or is okay with the lowered conflict, or appreciates it, well, this could be it. It's a very accessible, yet still fresh view of Dune Imperium with more buttons to press. It's especially likely that 1 to 2 player groups are going to appreciate this increased playground of stuff more. And then you can just relish how the Dune card play meets worker placement for all the new combos. You can appreciate all that more. We cannot understate how many new builds are possible with tech specialties just influencing it all.
So many plays in this game.
Yeah. And like without even thinking about playing or an intrigue.
Wait a minute, wait, Ashton, if I just go here, I draw from this card, right? Oh, sick. Okay, this works out.
Is that your turn?
Yeah. I'm not rotating my troops, because,
I'm gonna go ahead and end the game for me at least. I'm gonna buy the Spice Must Flow, and then I have 3 of these to trash the card. So 2 points.
Sack of shit.
Maybe Rise of Ix should have just been completely modular to pick and choose which mechanics you want to play with, and in that would satisfy a larger audience. But how it is now, hey, if you love Dune Imperium, see in which way you love it, and then you can see if Rise of Ix is worth it for you. Min-maxers beware. If you want more replayability out of base game too, maybe just stick to Direwolf's digital app variants that even give you new hands. But hey, we haven't tried these, so we can't speak much about actual gameplay.
My personal score for Dune Imperium when played with Rise of Ix is 3 out of 10, a bad time. First things first, this expansion has way too much RNG and doesn't use all that randomness in a good way. In all the games we've played, the winner has always luck-sacked into something really dumb. Ridiculous things that players had no control over just kept happening. Like someone playing all 3 of their entry cards, which all gave swords to steal a 2-point fight. Top decking the perfect high impact card. First player not drawing a card to let them go on Highliner. Which, by the way, is a bullshit spot that usually insta-wins you the battle, assuming no wacky random nonsense, and it provides water to get more spice to do it again. The list goes on and on with how no wins felt satisfying. It felt more like the game picked the winner rather than the players. As you might imagine, if that's what's going on in a Euro, it's pretty much a death sentence when it comes to my personal enjoyment. That and a lack of players meaningfully interacting with each other, which also feels like player interaction lessened because it rarely ever felt like I could directly affect everyone else, especially since combat just feels like whoever goes in Highliner wins. At which point, the only other interaction other players could really do is block where I go. But then it's pretty easy to plan around that and figure out how to get what you want by going elsewhere, especially because with the expansion, it's much easier for players to diversify their strategies and do different things, causing less shared interest over spaces. Ergo, less of someone being blocked off what they wanted. Next, dreadnoughts don't feel particularly special, and it feels really bad that buying them is attached to also buying. But we've already said all that in the cons, so, moving on. I would have much preferred if dreadnoughts were cheaper, but worth way more power, while also dying like normal troops. They should be something you have to think about deploying to squeeze in more strength when sending in less troops, instead of something you don't even think about and almost always throw in once you have them. Techs are nice though, however, a lot of them don't feel nearly high impact enough unless purchased early. Also, there's huge randomness in which ones show up and when. I also, for the most part, barely notice the new cards. Like, sure, I'll get a couple of the expansion, intrigue, and deck cards, but if I try and remember what they were, they don't feel like they were really doing anything special beyond just being able to interact with new expansion mechanics like techs and dreadnoughts. As a result, they mostly just end up diluting the card pools and adding even more variance to the game, which can easily end up causing the Imperium row to stagnate and no one buys any of the 5 cards revealed. Also, epic mode isn't even that much more epic. Late game, everyone's so powerful anyways that playing to 12 points basically just causes the game to last another round or two. Shipping track is cool though, and so are the new characters, but those really aren't anything too special, especially with character asymmetry being pretty low. I'm also getting the feeling that Dune Imperium in general is plummeting for me personally, because now that I'm way more familiar with the game, it's starting to feel really monotonous and autopilot-y instead of having tons of possibility like I said in the base game review. I'm really starting to hate how you're hardlined into getting points from the alliance track and fights, especially because there's no other spot on the board that can possibly contest someone going on Highliner space, which ends up being an insta-win unless everyone else is really lucky with having a bunch of extra strength through random deck and entry cards they just happen to have. Also, our group is getting good enough that it feels like games end way too quickly for deck building to really matter that much. There's a very tried and true meta of rushing the alliance tracks, winning a few fights, and maybe buying 1 or 2 Spice Must Flow cards to seal out the game. And if you luck sack into RNG victory points from entry cards, all the better. So because the point system is so rigid, it's very easy to tell who's going to win up until the randomness kicks in and players pull out all these gotcha entry cards that can completely steal games away and are almost impossible to counterplay unless you have your own hilarious bullshit to pull. So yeah, Dune Imperium has seemingly shifted into the territory of just another Euro for me because all the myriad of gameplay options has now collapsed into a select few autopilot-y actions. And the RNG feels way too swingy and out of my control to feel good about victories. I'm now bored between turns, can analyze the game state fairly quickly, and feel trapped between a small number of viable spaces. But who knows? Maybe base game was just a tighter, better experience. At the same time though, now that we see just how powerful Highliner is, in combination with how everyone in our group gets points way faster because they all realize you only get them from a few sources, so just rush those sources, results in me not exactly looking forward to even playing just base game again. I feel like I just broke Rodney Smith's heart, for which I'm profusely sorry for. Like, it was good at first, but then after playing more, it just got wacky, and not in a good way. Like, what am I supposed to do about it?
My personal score for Rise of X is going to be a 5 out of 10. I have an average time with it. Man, I'm not happy about this one. I am just not pleased. Not at all. See, Dune Imperium was a formula I really liked. Fairly easy to grasp, cool universe, it's Dune, and also had some great conflict. It was exactly what I wanted out of a limited deck builder, with some hidden information with the intrigues that I could keep track of. Now we throw in Rise of X, which sounded so great, but I actually feel that as much as I was initially excited by all the cool stuff, I'm actually immensely frustrated with it during gameplay to reduce my enjoyment to far below base game. A lot of this actually falls under the umbrella that I don't enjoy Rise of X being more solitaire feeling, while simultaneously having more to keep track of in the game. While there's the same amount of spaces, they're more complex, which makes me have to read all the tech tiles and manage my spies for that, or worry about my freighter progression. Then, yeah, as we covered in the cons, the conflict can only get hurt with more substitutes for points, and I really don't like that direction that this game goes towards. That conflict was one of my favorite parts of base game, to calculate all the troops to put in, or be careful to save up for the next round. And now, when people can just brain dead dreadnought to get third place, or have more types of intrigues to affect outcomes, that is pretty gross. Oh man, I just have a really murky idea of what's going on with the intrigues now. Before, I could keep track of points people could be getting, or what they could potentially add to combat. Now, I just have little idea with the bigger deck. And plus, the game states are just more complex that I forget about my friend's attributes and focus so much on mine. But again, that's individual complexity that wasn't something I particularly wanted to focus on in Dune Imperium. Another gripe is the tech tiles. I thought they were cool at first. Like I was playing a more dense Euro with the engine building, or some TCG with the drawing and discarding. But after a while, I realized that they weren't balanced, and I sure as heck couldn't keep up with my opponents constantly triggering theirs every single round. For me, they just add more to read in a corner of the board that I don't like to keep track of. Overall, the game is just more janky feeling to me. Like, spaces I thought were previously cool in base game like Highliner don't feel that cool to me anymore because they've been overtuned to the point where they just feel janky. Okay, alright. Actually, my relationship with Highliner is starting to show me that Dune Imperium systems with and without the expansion are starting to show their age for me. These faction tracks, they're always the same. Your starting deck, it's always the same. Conflicts that don't give points feel like a buzzkill and encourage people to do their own Euro-y things. Intrigue cards not being that balanced are unhealthy in a game of 2 hours. These are all ideas I thought would be fixed in an expansion. But no! Rise of Ix actually makes these problems worse! Especially with the randomness. I kid you not. Almost every single game of Rise of Ix was determined by some RNG with some intrigue card. To make it worse, I think the theming, while never strong, was actually severely hurt with this expansion. Not only is everyone doing their own thing, sometimes going off planet more to get points out of nowhere, the stronger emphasis on trashing and discarding cards just doesn't make sense on a Dune universe. Game by game, there are still those nice tense moments where it's all riding on a faction track overtaking, or a specific combat, or me getting the right hand for next turn, which is great. But hey, I had those exact same moments in base game. And many times those moments just wouldn't happen because everyone is more focused on their own decks, or strategies, or confused about intrigue power, or someone can get a point from a tech tile. Okay, it's not all doom and gloom. One, I love using all the new cards and seeing how they interact with the base game spaces and cards. While there is some annoyance on not being able to purchase my favorite characters as much because the deck is bloated, the new card abilities and art are a joy to play with. But why couldn't they do something with starting the game with this card? Or making it always purchasable in a game mode? Anyways, this new conflict card is a great addition for more tension late game. This is just really tragic. An expensive expansion I thought would breathe all sorts of new life into one of my top games. Just served to burn me out harder of this game. Who would I play with this expansion with? It has way too much unhealthy randomness and solitariness for my more complexity favorable friends. So why bother adding this complexity if it doesn't help the game? As always, thanks to our patrons for making videos like this possible. We got Manuel G, Brian C, Clifford H, NW, Max B, Bory, Jeremy MC, Charlie P, Quinton S, MS, Travis R, Alvin Y, Bob T, Ryan D, Trevor L, Matt G, Experience Everyone, Brian J, Brad G, Telma Period, Mark A, James M, FB, Charles B Jr., Josh J, Baspar, Brado, Swiffy, Brian Z, Colin Allison, Hudson T, Pearson M, Omar F, MY, Ethan P, Bradley J, John C, Calvin V, Dorcas, SS Co, Alex L, Rob Bar, 2, Dave F, Josh R, Pat, Zero Z, Il Wayne, Kyle M, Amir H, Riley Spain, Keanu S, Owl Books, Kyle M, Kyle C, John P, Nicholas R, Robin, Andre, Kevin G, Alex G, Tim W, Jordan F, Ben A, Jeff B. And then we got some more on screen here. And then we also got our Mad Lads of Cardboard. We got ZL, Jeff L, Peter Z, that guy right there. And we got our Mad Lady Cardboard. We got Amy. So yeah, those were our thoughts on Rise of Ix over here. Yeah, so remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Yeah, we'll see what happens to Dune board games in the future. But yeah, here's to hoping they come up with a different expansion for Dune Imperium. Maybe, please.